so far?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's go through this. So the main points that we need to cover in the pseudocode is the calculating the total mark as well. They mentioned here total mark, the average mark, selection of grade, this part, the grade awarded that we're doing, and output for each student name, total mark. This is again the last things we need to output, and as well as the number of like the count of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails. So we're gonna have different, variable names for that, like the counter for that. Okay. So this one is dealing with arrays and lists. The first two arrays they already told you, right? Your student name and student mark. This is the main two you have to deal with. The variables you have, the two that they gave you, class size, subject number. But along with these, you need counters for each grade awarded, right? Because they told you at the end, you need to output the number of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails. So you're gonna have a counter for each of these. So here they have student counter, they have the student counter, distinction number, merit number, pass number, fail number. All right. Could be an array or a list. So this is up to you. The student counter is as well. Like it's going to keep a track of how many students you have or the number of students you're going to deal with. Constants is distinction, merit, pass. Could be variables. So the basic idea here is that constants are those things that don't change throughout the program, right? And the reason that they did this as constant is because why? Because they already told you that, this is the fixed, like, table of how you're gonna make every grade awarded. So you can do that as constant. If you don't, that's fine too, as long as your code is still logical enough to function. Okay, so first of all, if you're going to declare all the variables, the first one, like they told you as well, the ones that you need to output is what? Your total mark, average mark, grade awarded. So you have declare total mark of an array 1 to 50 of integer, declare average mark array 1 to 50 of integer. And the reason they're doing these two as, first of all, as an array is because for every student, you have a total mark, right? So that's why they have an array. Why did they do 1 to 50? That's because you need like an upper bound value. You don't know how many students there are yet. So you're just gonna estimate any random one. Like it's better if you took like 1 to 100 as well. That would be better, like a larger number, so that the actual array that you're using is obviously going to be smaller than that. But if I, for example, said that I made an array of total mark of, let's say, 1 to 15, and the class size that the user enters is, let's say, 50, then that would be a problem. Then the user wouldn't be able to actually run the program properly, right? Yeah, okay. So declare subject counter, student counter, and distinction number as integer, and merit number, pass number, fail number. Again, these are all as integers. They told us we're dealing with whole numbers anyway. And yeah, okay. Do you have any questions so far?
No, but like if we wrote this answer, we will write it in the same form.
In the same form as in the format, like they're writing it?
Yes.
Yes, you would.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, remember when we were doing pseudocode, we would do it as declare and then the variable number or name or whatever the thing is. And normally here we would write as array, but it's better if you write a colon and then the data type that you're mentioning of integer. Like this is the whole data type that you're mentioning. If you have an array, they're gonna write array of the size of integer, and then otherwise it's gonna be the colon and then the data type.
Okay.
All right. Now, here they declare distinction, merit, pass as constants. And what are the constants? Constant distinction is equals to 70. Why? Because they said distinction is greater than or equal to 70. Obviously, we have to make sure that it's like, across the limits. Let's say for merit, for example, they said 55 greater than or equal to 55 and less than 70. So obviously in our code, there's going to be some kind of, check that is going to make sure that it's still less than 70, even if it's greater than 55. And so pass is 40, they said less than 40. Yeah. Do you understand so far?
Okay.
All right.
Could you write that
Could I write what?
like in the lines?
In the lines, yeah, sure. Here. I actually have to download it first. 1 second.
Okay.
All right. Okay, here. Okay. Let's write it. Actually, I'll write in this page. It's cleaner. Okay. All right. So first off, could you start like reminding me all the variables that we're using?
We're using the integer.
I mean the variable names and things like that.
Oh, total mark.
Total mark. And why are we using this one?
Because it's for array, for like when like for integer the mark.
Yeah, I mean in the code, why are we declaring a total mark?
Because it's like 1:50.
1:50. Okay. I mean total mark is being used as a variable that we're storing the total marks for all the subjects for for like every student, right? That's why we have an array of it. Otherwise, we would have had like just a single variable.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And then the next one is, what is the next one here? Average
Average mark.
mark. And this is like the average for every student. Like basically, let's say you have 5 subjects, and for all those 5 subjects, the marks that you get, you're gonna add them up and store that inside total mark. And then we're gonna find the average. The way we're gonna find the average is the total mark divided by the number of subjects. So total mark divided by like your total mark divided by 5. And then you'd get your average mark. So we have to do this for every single student. That's why it has to be in an array.
Okay.
Average mark. Okay. Average mark of array, let's say we can call it of a size of 1 to 50 of integer. All right. Next we have the subject counter. So declare subject counter. This is like keeping track of how many subjects we're on and stuff like that. So integer. Declare the student counter. Oh, another thing, they told us in the question that assume that the data is already entered. So we don't actually need like an input from anyone, from like any user. We can just deal with the calculations and stuff.
Okay.
Student counter distinction number. This is the counter for the like keeping track of how many distinctions there are in a class. Integer. And this has to be in whole number. Obviously, we can only have a whole number of distinctions or passes or fails. Merit. Declare your pass number. Integer. Declare your fail number and integer. So it's up to you if you wanted to make the distinction, merit, and pass as a variable, you could, and then assign it a value, which would be distinction 70, merit 55, and pass 40. But it's better if you consider this as a constant as well.
Okay.
Distinction. And how do we have these values, 70, 55, and 40?
In distinction.
Mm-hmm.
like in the average mark it says greater than or equal to 70, which is distinction. And
Yeah,
merit is basically 55.
55 to
And
70, and because they gave us the fixed value 55, you're using that.
yes, and fail is less than 40, which is 40.
Yep. All right, so once you have these, you're going
Basically,
to initialize. Sorry.
why didn't they put less than 40 in constant pass equal to less than 40?
When you have a variable, you like the less than or greater than symbol, these things are relational operators. We can't have that inside a variable, right? How would we make the computer understand that we need less than 40 values for this? It's a constant value. It can only hold one thing. It can only hold one value. So it has pass is equals to 40, and we're gonna use this pass. We're gonna be like, they said less. It should be for pass. It should be less than 40, right? Well, let me check the question once again. For fail, it should be less than 40. For pass, it should be greater than 40, right? So for this, what we're going to do in the code somewhere, we're going to be like pass greater than, sorry, we're going to do the student mark is greater than pass, and student mark is less than, like, less than merit. You understand?
Yes.
So instead of, using these numbers inside our code, we're just going to use these words so that it's easier to understand what these numbers mean.
Okay.
Okay, so next we have the initialization. Here they use the comments as well. It'll be when you're writing this code, make sure that you're explaining all the parts that you're using, especially the ones that you added yourself. Like for here, for example, meaningful identifier names and appropriate data structures, variables, constants, and the given arrays to store all the data required. So this whole part, let me highlight here. This whole part is just dealing with all the declarations and the constants and variables that you need for as well as the arrays declarations that you need for the whole code. All right. Now we're going to initialize. This was the declaration. Now we're initializing by giving whatever values we need to give to these variables, right? So here, initialization process for this scenario, initializing the running totals used for grades and combined totals. So when we're dealing with the total mark, it's not the total mark, sorry. When we're dealing with the distinction number, merit number, pass number, fail number, these are the counters, right? These are trying to keep track of the number of students that have got distinctions, the number of students that got merit, the number of students that have passed, and the number of students that have failed. So to keep this, we need to keep adding up those like people. So initially, it has to be given some value. That's why we're giving it a 0 value.
Okay.
Also, for comment, again, we have double slash to make sure that code understands that this is a comment.
Oh, that's common?
Yes, when you have these double slash, this means, and then initializing process for this scenario, you can write anything inside a comment. This is basically for the programmer to understand what's happening at this part. And in this case, it's for the examiner to understand what you're doing at what part of the code. So whenever you have something to explain to the examiner, of a part of a code, you're going to do this double slash, and then you're going to write down whatever you want to write. And if you're going to the next line, if your thing is going to the next line, you're going to double slash again.
Okay.
All right. Initialization process. This is the part where you initialize the totals. So here we're gonna write distinction number. Make sure you keep track of the like whenever you declare a variable. For example, here distinction number, I did B capital and N capital or uppercase, right? So I have to make sure I do that here as well. So the variable name cannot change once you have declared it there.
Yes.
So distinction number is equal to 0. Sorry, not equal. So you're gonna give it the arrow thing and then 0. Distinction, sorry, merit number as well, 0. Merit number 0. And then pass number and fail number. Also, notice how in the constants we didn't declare fail because we didn't need to. We can use pass as the upper bound for fail and the lower bound for pass.
Yeah.
All right. Now that we have this, we're gonna actually start the real code stuff. We've just declared and initialized. Now, you're going to first off, what are we doing here? Total marks. All right. Oh, actually, I got it wrong. Here, we're also initializing for total mark. So total mark is also storing totals, right? But in this case, this is an array. So we need to declare every single array, and we have to we have to make sure that all those variable spaces have the 0 stored in it. So total mark, like total mark 1 is 0, total mark 2 is 0, and things like that. So we can use that you can do that using a loop in a shortcut way. Here we're going to do for the student counter. We how we do for I 1 to 20, 1 to something. I has no meaning in English, right? So we're trying to use something that would help the examiner understand why we're using it. So this is giving it a meaningful variable name. For student counter is given 1 to the number of
Teacher,
students, which yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but like you can use this every time, like the student counter variable.
I mean, it depends on your question. Here we're talking about the students, right? So we have a student counter. In another scenario, maybe you have the number of cars, so you could have car counter or something like that.
I meant like multiple times in the same thing.
Student counter multiple. Yeah, you can. If I mean, yeah, you can, because it's being set to a constant thing after you're done with it. I'm not sure if we do need this later. Yeah. They've used it here too. For student counter 1 to class size, and then for subject counter. So you'll notice here is that student counter is considered I, and subject counter is like J. So when you have a 2D array, it would be like, where do we have the 2D array? It was up here, not here. Sorry, it was student mark, right? Student mark was our 2D array. So student mark, I, J, in this case would be student mark, student counter, dot, the subject counter. So for this student, you have a subject counter of this, then you have to, consider this.
Okay.
Okay. Here, student counter 1, 2, the number of students you have, and they told you, notice how we didn't actually declare class size, and the ones that they gave us, class size, subject number, student name, and student mark. They said that it already exists, so you didn't declare it. Even if you did declare it, it's fine. You can do that too, just to be safe. So here, I'm gonna do class size, 1 to class size. And then here our actual for loop starts. Notice the indentation for a for loop. Once you start a for loop, whatever code comes inside it has to be indented. And the end of the loop is noted by next, right? So for class size, for one student counter 1 to class size, we're going to indent this and do total mark. Student mark, student counter is given 1. So we're initializing all of them to 0. And then next student counter. All right, now we've done all the initializations. So here, programming techniques of iteration, selection, totaling, counter. Here we have to do all the get the total mark. You have to get the average mark. We have to get the grade that we're assigning as well. So first off, for student counter 1 to class size, for subject counter 1 to subject number. So for each student, we're considering all the subjects, and then we move on to the next student, and then we consider all his subjects, and the next student we consider all her subjects. It has to run. Let's say you have 5 subjects, and let's say there are 20 students. All right. So for the first student, this inner loop will run 5 times for the 5 subjects, and then the second student will run 5 times, and the third student it will run 5 more times, and it'll keep going like that until you reach the last student and you're done with that last student's last subject.
Okay.
All right. So let's go through this. Here, for subject student counter 1 to class size, this is your 2D array here. For subject counter 1 to subject number. Total mark, this is when you're editing your total mark. Total mark student counter is given total mark student counter. So like 0 initially plus student mark, student counter, and like comma subject counter. Normally you could use a dot as well, but I mean this is better. This is way better actually, using a comma between the 2D arrays, right? So student mark is your 2D array. Let me write this down here actually. Let's start this outer for loop for student counter is given the first student to the last student, which is the class size. Now indent this because everything that comes after this right now is inside this for loop. So it's another for loop, a nested for loop here for subject counter. For subject counter 1 to the subject number. So it's like from the first subject to the last subject for the specific student that we're talking about. To subject. Do you understand so far?
Yes.
Right. Student counter. So here we're going to add up all the subjects, the subject marks for every student. So the total mark has to now be storing what the, where'd it go? Yeah. Okay, the total mark itself, whatever the total is, added up with the current subject we're talking about, the marks of the current subject we're talking about. Total mark and student counter plus what? The student mark array, the 2D array.
Yes.
And inside this, and inside a 2D array, the first parameter is here, student counter. And the second one is subject counter.
Yeah.
Let me make this bigger. All right. Can you see this clearly?
Yes.
Actually, it's still not coming in one line, so I'll just make it bigger anyway. All right. I'll keep this like this. You understand this is still in one line. It's not supposed to be in a separate line.
Yeah. I did write it down.
All right, great. Total mark. Yeah, so here you've added your total mark, but we also need to find out the average, right? Are we doing average inside this, or can we get it into it? It's better if we just do it inside this. Yeah. Okay. Total mark is here, and then subject counter. Next, subject counter. Here, once we're done with finding the total mark for every single student, we don't need this subject counter to continue anymore. We just need to have like an average for every single one. We only need total to find out the average, right? We don't have to keep average inside that. So here, for this inner for loop, subject counter for loop, we're gonna have next subject counter. All right. Now we're still inside this outer for loop, right? The one which had student counter on it. We're gonna be using this to find out the average mark for every student. And we can do that by the total that we just found out in this loop that we did before, right? So here we'll have average mark for the student, whatever student we were talking about, student counter, is gonna have int. Oh, int is the what you use to forcefully make any kind of data like mark that's stored into a whole number. So for example, if the mark for a specific student was 15.5, int putting that int outside is gonna forcefully make that for like 15. Or if it's rounding off to an upper bound, is gonna make it 16.
Okay.
Right. So for this one, we need to, where did it go? 0.5, excuse me, 1 second. And all right. Int is having total mark, the mark that we just calculated, of whatever student we're talking about, divided by the subject number. So the number of subjects we have, so we can get an average out of it. Here they did int to this whole thing. We're adding 0.5 inside the average. I'm not entirely sure why they did that, but if it's important, they'll have it mentioned up here. Version calculate the store. All right. round it to the nearest whole number, right? When we're rounding to the nearest whole number, all right, so this must be the part where I said, like, if it's an upper bound rounding, like 15.5, it should actually be 16, not 15 itself.
16.
So yeah. So if I did int this directly, then it would probably be 15. But if I'm doing plus 0.5, it'll round it off to an upper bound of 16.
Yeah.
Okay. So here, after total mark divided by the subject number, we're going to have this added to 0.5. And then whatever we get is going to be forcefully turned into an integer value.
Okay.
All right. So once we have the average mark, what else did we need? We needed the grade that we're awarding, right? Based on the constants that they gave us, or the table that they gave us. So where were we here? Yeah. We've got the average. Now, based on the average that we have, we're going to give them the mark. Before we get to the grade, we could even output the name, all the things that they wanted in the output. This name, combined total mark.
Yeah, I got that point.
Yeah, we could do this after the whole code as well, but if you wanted to, do it right away after you got everything, you could do that too. So, what do you want to do? Right now or later?
Oh, you could do that later because I got that part. I need to know about the distinction number.
All right, then that's fine. Now, here in this distinction part, so based on the average mark, we're going to be awarding them the grades, right? So if, for example, the average mark was, let's stay here. So let's, for example, say the average mark was, it was 75. That is, sorry, not 75. You can't even have greater than or equal. Yeah, you can have 75. So let's say the average mark was 75, then you should give the student a distinction, right?
Yes.
So here we're gonna have this inside a if statement, and it has to go in this order for a specific reason. So we'll get to why later. But here, if average mark student counter is greater than equals to the distinction, what's my distinction value? 70, right? In our code.
Yes, that's something.
So if average mark of the student counter is greater than equals to 70, then distinction number is given distinction number plus 1. So here you're incrementing the number of students that you have for distinctions, and output grade distinction. So they're outputting the part where you're like, listen, you've gotten this distinction, and we're doing this inside a for loop. So for every student is going to tell them the grade as they enter the values, and at the end of it as well.
Okay, so for like everything, like distinction, average, and pass number, it's gonna be the same, and also the fail number.
Distinction, average, and pass number
Like
for
they're gonna
who?
plus.
They're gonna
Like
plus.
for merit, there's
Oh, I see
merit
what you
number.
mean. Okay. No, so basically what's happening is distinction number is not being outputted, or merit number, or even pass number, or fail number. These are not being outputted anywhere inside this for loop. This is just keeping a track or keeping a total of the number of students that got this grade. And at the end of the program, when you're done with this for loop, it's going to tell you here, it's like, listen, you have these number of distinctions, these number of merits, these number of passes, and these number of fails. So this is just going to be a constant value, whatever at the end of the program that you get.
Okay.
All right. So here, another thing the reason that they did, this grade distinction, the reason they did name, combined mark, and average mark output before this is because, in the question they said output for each student the name, combined mark. It could be up and down. It doesn't actually make that much of a difference, but they would prefer it this way, I guess. So if average mark student counter is greater than equal to distinction, then the grade tells the student that you got grade distinction, and increment the total count that you have for the number of distinctions, right? So once you do this, it just it ignores all the other else conditions, and goes to next student counter. If it's not greater than if it's not greater than 70, then it's going to consider if average mark is greater than equals to merit. Similarly, then if average mark is greater than equals to pass, the else part doesn't have an if, it just has else. Fail is because obviously if it's not pass or merit or distinction, it has to be a fail, and they're incrementing fail. Now the reason they're going in this order is because if, for example, I had fail at the start, actually let's not take that. If I had pass at the start, it would automatically consider all of them as pass, because distinction is also a pass and also a merit, right? But a merit cannot be a distinction and a pass cannot be a distinction. Do you understand?
Yes.
So that's why you have to go in this order, unless you had used a case, the case statement, the case of, if case of this, in
Yeah,
case
the
of
case.
that. Yeah, if you use that, then you can go up and down with it. That doesn't make that much of a difference. But in this scenario, you have to be in this order.
Okay.
There's another way you could use if conditions with, making sure that everything's in the right place. You could do if average mark, you could do if the average mark is greater than equals to merit and the average mark is less than equals to distinction, then it would be fine by adding
All
like
right.
the and logical thing.
Okay. Why did they
Right?
write and if 3 times?
And because every single else that you're doing has to have an end if of its own, else if that you're doing. So like for else there's no
And
end if,
what if,
but for this there is, and for this there is, and the outer one.
oh, so what if you write it up like after every like part of the
Um,
pseudocode?
no, that would be a problem because we can't let a person that has a distinction also be considered inside the merit and the past counter, because this way the distinction student would also increment the merit number counter and the pass counter, right?
Okay.
But if you wanted to do that, you would use if average mark is greater than equal to merit and average mark is less than equals to, sorry, less than distinction, then that would be fine,
Okay.
right? Do you want me to write anything here down?
No, I got it.
Okay, great. So at the end of this, again, you're just going to output all the number of students that are there for distinctions, merit, passes, and fails.